I was having what I thought was just an ordinary Sunday morning. The sun was filtering through my blinds, coffee brewing, when my parents called to check in on my new place. Little did they know I had just bought a duplex without telling them, my first major investment. What I overheard next froze me in place. My mother was telling my father about their plan for my brother's entire family to move in with me for free. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me as I reveal how this family scheme completely backfired. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Denver, Colorado, I always felt like I was living in a shadow. My older brother Jackson was the golden child of the family. Everything he did was praised and celebrated, even when his decisions were questionable at best. I remember when he dropped out of college to start a landscaping business with no business plan. My parents called him entrepreneurial and brave. When I decided to major in computer science and work part-time to pay for my books, I was just playing it safe. This pattern continued throughout our childhood and into adulthood. Jackson would make impulsive decisions, and somehow I would be expected to understand and support him. My parents created this dynamic where family meant dropping everything to help each other, but somehow I was always the one doing the helping, and Jackson was always on the receiving end. Burke family is everything my dad would say whenever I showed any hesitation about lending money or time to help Jackson out of his latest crisis. When you need help someday, we will all be there for you too. But that help never materialized when I needed it. When I was working through college with minimal support from my parents, they were busy helping Jackson with his third failed business attempt. While I was eating ramen noodles and working night shifts at the campus library, they were co-signing loans for Jackson and his wife, Amanda. After graduating, I landed a good job at a tech company that allowed me to start building financial stability. While my friends were buying new cars and taking exotic vacations, I lived frugally in a small apartment, cooking at home and saving every penny I could. My goal was clear financial independence and building wealth through real estate investment. For 3 years, I researched the housing market, attended investment seminars, and built relationships with real estate professionals. Then I found it, a perfect duplex in a growing neighborhood just outside downtown Denver. The property needed some cosmetic updates, but had good bones and was in an area projected to increase in value over the next 5 years. I worked with my realtor, Sarah, to secure the property at a price that would allow me to rent out one unit and cover most of my mortgage. The numbers worked, and I was beyond excited. This was my first major step toward building real wealth completely on my own terms. But I made a deliberate decision not to tell my family about the purchase until everything was finalized. Experience had taught me that any financial success I had would somehow be viewed as a resource for Jackson to tap into. I wanted this win to be mine alone. The relationship between Jackson and me had grown more strained over the years. After his landscaping venture failed, he tried opening a food truck, then a home cleaning service, and finally settled into a middling sales job that he complained about constantly. Through it all, he maintained a lifestyle that was beyond his means. Jackson married Amanda right out of high school, and they quickly had 3 kids, Mason, Lily, and Noah. Despite his financial instability, they always seemed to have the newest phones, take vacations, and their kids were involved in expensive extracurricular activities. Meanwhile, the pattern of Jackson asking me for loans became so routine that I could predict the phone calls. They always started with casual catching up, then a mention of some unexpected expense, followed by, "I hate to ask, but..." The money never came back, and over time these loans amounted to thousands of dollars. I still remember the last time I lent him money. It was for his daughter Lily's dance recital costume. He needed $300 and promised to pay me back in 2 weeks. 6 months later, when I gently reminded him, he got defensive and said, "I cannot believe you would nickel and dime your own niece. It is just money, Burke." That was the moment I decided I needed stronger boundaries. But family dynamics are hard to change, and the weight of obligation and guilt continued to influence my decisions more than I cared to admit. When my parents called that Sunday morning to casually ask about my new living situation, I thought nothing of it. Then the questions started getting oddly specific. "So how many bedrooms does your place have again?" my mom asked. "Just the two," I replied, not mentioning that I owned both units of the duplex. "And is there a yard?" "Good schools nearby," my dad chimed in. I answered their questions but started to feel something was off. Why were they so interested in the local schools when I was single with no kids? After we finished chatting, I realized I had not properly ended the call. As I went to hang up, I overheard my mother speaking to my father, clearly thinking I was no longer on the line. "Well, it sounds perfect. Jackson and Amanda can have the master bedroom. The boys can share the second bedroom, and they can set up Lily in the dining nook. Burke can sleep on the pull-out couch until they find their feet again." I nearly dropped my phone. They were planning to move Jackson's entire family into my new home without even asking me, and apparently I was supposed to give up my own bedroom in the process. The revelation left me stunned. My hands were shaking as I ended the call, making sure they heard the click this time. I paced around my kitchen trying to process what I had just heard. They had not even asked me. They just assumed I would give up my space, my privacy, and my peace for Jackson. Again, for days, I carried this knowledge around like a rock in my stomach. I debated confronting them immediately, but decided to wait and see how they planned to present this to me. Part of me still could not believe they would be so presumptuous. My anxiety built throughout the week. I had trouble focusing at work and found myself lying awake at night, rehearsing conversations in my head. What would I say when they finally brought it up? How could I stand up for myself without causing a family rift? I sought advice from my best friend Tyler over beers that Friday. Tyler had known my family dynamics for years and had always been direct about his observations. "Dude, they treat you like an ATM, with feelings," he said bluntly. "You need to shut this down before it starts. Once they move in, you will never get them out." I knew he was right, but years of conditioning made it hard to imagine standing up to my family. The weight of expected obedience was heavy. That Sunday, the text came, "Family dinner tonight at 6. We have some big news to share. Do not be late." The knot in my stomach tightened. This was it. I spent the afternoon mentally preparing myself for what was to come, rehearsing boundaries and responses. I would be firm but kind, clear but not confrontational. At least that was the plan. When I arrived at my parents' house, my brother's car was already in the driveway. Inside, the scene was set like a staged intervention. My parents sat on one side of the dining table with Jackson and Amanda on the other. Their kids were in the living room watching TV. "Burke, come sit down," my mother said with unusual enthusiasm. "We have been waiting for you." Dinner was a tense affair with forced small talk until my father cleared his throat and addressed the table. "So, we have something important to discuss as a family," he began, using his family meeting voice that I remembered from childhood. "Jackson and Amanda have hit a rough patch. The landlord of their apartment complex has sold the building, and all tenants have to be out by the end of the month." I noticed Jackson staring at his plate, while Amanda dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "We thought about having them move in with us." My mother continued, "But with 3 growing kids and your father's back problems, it just would not work." I could see where this was going, but stayed silent, observing how they would present their solution that they had already decided upon without me. Then we remembered that Burke just got a new place, my father said, as if this was a sudden inspiration rather than a premeditated plan, and it got us thinking about a perfect solution for everyone. Jackson finally looked up. "We would not ask if we had any other option, bro. You know that." The absolute conviction with which he delivered that lie almost made me laugh out loud. There were always other options. They just were not as convenient or cheap as taking advantage of me. My mother leaned forward, her expression a practiced blend of concern and encouragement. We thought that, since you have that nice new place with 2 bedrooms, Jackson's family could take the main area. You are only one person after all. You could take the smaller bedroom or even share the space until they get back on their feet. Which would be soon, Amanda added quickly. Just until Jackson's commission check comes in from the Richards account. There it was. The full proposal laid bare, and just as I had overheard, not a single mention of rent, no timeline for moving out beyond some vague reference to a commission check that may or may not materialize. And I was expected to not only welcome them, but give up my bedroom and privacy in the process. "What do you think, Burke?" my father asked, his tone suggesting there was only one acceptable answer. I felt the familiar pressure building, the weight of family expectations crushing down on me like it had so many times before. This was the moment where I typically gave in, where the fear of disappointing them overrode my own needs and boundaries. But something was different this time. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity of the request, or perhaps it was the culmination of years of similar situations. Either way, I found myself at a breaking point. Still, I did not reveal what I knew. I simply told them I needed time to think about it, that it was a big decision that would impact my life significantly. They seemed surprised by this response, but agreed to give me a few days to come around to the idea. As I drove home that night, memories flooded back of all the times I had been in this position before. The time I had to postpone my college graduation trip because Jackson needed bail money. The Christmas I spent alone because I could not afford to fly home after helping Jackson pay for his kids' presents. The constant pattern of sacrifice that was expected of me while Jackson continued to make poor choices without consequences. The weight of those memories strengthened my resolve. I would not reveal my cards yet, but I also would not be manipulated again. The duplex was mine, and both units already had tenants lined up to move in the following week. I had signed the leases days before. I maintained radio silence with my family for the next 2 weeks, using work as an excuse to avoid their calls. Meanwhile, both units of my duplex were occupied by the new tenants as planned. The upstairs unit went to a young medical resident named Aiden, while the lower unit was rented to a retired couple, the Johnsons, who had downsized after their children left for college. I was at work on a Wednesday afternoon when my phone exploded with notifications. First came a series of texts from Jackson, all caps and expletives. Then, 3 missed calls from my mother, followed by a voicemail where she sounded like she was crying. Finally, a text from my father simply saying, "We need to talk." Now, a colleague stopped by my desk and noticed my expression. "Everything okay, family drama?" I said, trying to sound casual. Nothing new. But this was new. This was the moment of truth I had been both dreading and waiting for. My supervisor allowed me to leave early, and I headed home with a sense of impending confrontation. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw them, my parents' car, and Jackson's SUV parked haphazardly on the street in front of my duplex. Before I could even get out of my car, Jackson was storming toward me, his face contorted with anger. "What the hell, Burke? We drove by to see the place before moving in, and there are strangers living in OUR unit. What kind of game are you playing?" My parents approached behind him, my mother's expression hurt and confused, my father's stern and disappointed. "Burke, what is going on?" my father demanded. "We had an agreement." "No," I said, finding my voice with surprising steadiness. "We did not have an agreement. You had a plan that you never bothered to discuss with me before deciding it was happening." "We talked about it at dinner," Jackson shouted, drawing the attention of Mr. Johnson, who was watering plants on his porch. "You presented it as a done deal," I corrected him. And I said, "I needed to think about it." "There is nothing to think about," my mother interjected, her voice quivering with emotion. "This is family. We help each other in times of need." The irony of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Where was this family-first attitude when I was struggling through college? When I needed co-signers for my first apartment? when I worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Let us talk inside. I suggested, aware that we were creating a scene. We cannot go inside, Jackson snapped, because apparently you have rented out our space to complete strangers. That was when something inside me finally broke. Years of suppressed frustration and resentment rushed to the surface. Your space? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. You mean my property that I bought with my money? The investment I made after years of saving while you blew every dollar that came your way. That space. Jackson took a step back, clearly not expecting this response from me. I had always been the peacekeeper, the one who gave in to keep the family harmony. Burke, there is no need to be ugly about this. My father started, but I cut him off. I overheard you, I said, looking directly at my mother that day on the phone. I heard you planning to move them into my home without even asking me. I heard how I was supposed to sleep on my own couch while they took over the space I worked so hard for. My mother's face drained of color. You were not supposed to hear that. Clearly, I replied. Because if I was supposed to hear it, you might have considered asking me first. You would have said no, Jackson accused, and that would have been my right, I responded calmly. It is my property, my investment, my life. But we are family, my mother insisted, tears now flowing freely. Yes, we are, and family should respect each other. Family should not make plans to invade someone's home without permission. Family should not always expect one member to sacrifice while another takes. I turned to Jackson. Do you know what it took for me to buy this place? Do you have any idea the sacrifices I made? I worked through college. I lived on ramen while you were going on vacations. I drove the same old car for 10 years while you leased a new one every 3 years. I saved and planned and worked for this. Jackson's anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by a flash of shame that quickly turned defensive. Not all of us can be perfect like you, Burke. It is not about being perfect, I replied. It is about consequences. Your choices have consequences. Mine do too. The difference is that I have been dealing with mine while you have been expecting everyone else to handle yours. My father stepped forward, his negotiator face on. Burke, I understand you are upset, but surely we can work something out. Maybe they could just stay for a month until— No, I interrupted firmly. Both units are rented with year-long leases. The papers are signed. It is done. You did this deliberately, Jackson accused, his voice rising again. You knew we needed a place. I bought this property before I knew about your latest crisis, I pointed out. And yes, I deliberately rented both units because I knew what would happen if I did not. I knew you would move in temporarily and still be there 3 years later paying no rent and expecting me to fix everything that broke. The truth of my words hung in the air between us. For perhaps the first time, I was not backing down or softening my stance to keep the peace. If you really care about family, I continued, looking at each of them, then start treating all members with respect. Start acknowledging that I have the right to make decisions about my own property and life without being made to feel guilty for not setting myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. Jackson stormed off, kicking my garbage can as he went. This is not over, he called back. You will regret turning your back on family. My mother was sobbing now, my father's arm around her shoulders. He looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and confusion, as if he truly could not understand my position. Your brother has children, Burke, he said quietly. Where are they supposed to go? The same place everyone else goes when they cannot afford their lifestyle anymore, I replied. Somewhere within their means. Or they could move in with you. Your house has 4 bedrooms, and it is just the 2 of you now. My father's expression told me that option had already been considered and rejected, which only confirmed my suspicions about why I had been the chosen solution to this problem. As they turned to leave, my mother looked back at me. I do not know who you are anymore, she said, her voice breaking. The Burke I raised would never turn his back on family like this. Her words were designed to cut deep, and they did. But I stood my ground. The Burke you raised deserves the same respect and consideration you have always given Jackson. I am still here for my family, but on terms that respect my boundaries too. They left without another word, and I went inside shaking with adrenaline, but also feeling a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up for myself against the family dynamic that had defined me for so long. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 weeks passed without a word from any of them. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was the longest I had gone without contact with my family since leaving for college. At first, the silence was a relief. Then came the guilt and second-guessing. Had I been too harsh? Should I have found some compromise? The programming of a lifetime is not easily overcome, and I found myself reaching for my phone several times to call and apologize. But each time, I reminded myself of what was at stake, not just a property, but my self-respect and autonomy. I had made the right decision for myself, even if it came at a painful cost. The flying monkeys arrived in week 4. First came an email from Aunt Patricia telling me how disappointed she was in my selfish behavior. Then a call from my cousin Ryan, suggesting I was being unreasonable and should just help out for a few months. Finally, a text from my grandmother asking if the rumors were true that I had left Jackson's children homeless. I responded to, each with the same calm explanation I had made an investment with my hard-earned money. The units were legally rented to tenants with signed leases, and no, my brother's children were not homeless. They had moved in with my parents. That last bit of information had come from Mr. Johnson, who mentioned meeting my parents when they came by again, this time without Jackson, to peer sadly through the windows of the lower unit. Learning that Jackson's family had moved in with my parents was the final confirmation that their situation had never been as dire as they made it seem. There had always been another option. I was just the more convenient one. During this period, I found unexpected support. Tyler checked in regularly, validating my decision and helping me process my conflicted emotions. My colleague Maria recommended her therapist, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. Those therapy sessions became a lifeline. Dr. Harper helped me understand the family system I had been part of, how I had been assigned the role of fixer and provider while Jackson was allowed to remain the needy one, how these roles served a purpose in the family system but were ultimately destructive to all of us. By breaking this pattern, Dr. Harper explained, you are not just helping yourself, you are giving your brother the opportunity to grow and take responsibility. That is its own form of love, even if it does not feel like it right now. Gradually, I became more confident in my decision. The knot of guilt in my stomach loosened. I slept better. I even started to enjoy the freedom of not constantly anticipating the next family crisis I would be expected to solve. After 2 months of silence, my mother called. The conversation was stilted and careful, but it was a start. She did not apologize directly, but she did ask about my work and seemed genuinely interested in my response. We avoided the subject of the duplex entirely. A week later, my father called to ask if I would come to Sunday dinner. Just you, he specified. We need to talk. I agreed with trepidation. When I arrived, the house was quiet without the chaos of Jackson's kids. My parents seemed older, somehow tired, but also more present than they had been in our previous interactions. Jackson and Amanda found an apartment, my father said, as we sat down to dinner. It is smaller than what they had before, but the rent is manageable with both of them working. Both of them working. That was new information. Amanda had not held a steady job since Lily was born. That is good to hear, I replied cautiously. Having them here was challenging, my mother admitted. I had forgotten how much energy 3 children require. We ate in silence for a few minutes before my father spoke again. We may not agree with how you handled things, Burke, but we have come to understand your position better. It was not an apology, but from my father, it was the closest thing to one I had ever received. I nodded, accepting it for what it was. Over the following months, a new family dynamic slowly emerged. Jackson and I remained distant but civil when we encountered each other at family events. My parents were more respectful of my boundaries, no longer volunteering my resources without consultation. Most surprisingly, Jackson seemed to be making changes. Amanda had a steady job at a local dentist office. They had downsized to one car. The kids were still in activities, but more reasonably priced ones, through the community center. Meanwhile, my investment was thriving. The property value increased by 15% in just the first year, partly due to new development in the area. My tenants were reliable and appreciated the improvements I made to the property. Aiden even helped me set up an online portal for rent payments and maintenance requests, streamlining the landlord process. I found myself enjoying property ownership more than I expected. There was satisfaction in creating a well-maintained, comfortable space for others while building my own financial security. I started researching additional investment properties this time with more confidence in both my financial decisions and my ability to maintain boundaries. The most unexpected outcome was my evolving relationship with my parents. With the enabling pattern disrupted, they began to see me as an individual with my own life and goals, not just as an extension of the family system or a resource for Jackson. Our conversations became more genuine, focused on sharing our lives rather than solving crises. Through therapy and self-reflection, I came to understand that true family support goes both ways. It requires mutual respect, consideration, and a balance of giving and receiving. Helping others should never mean consistently sacrificing your own well-being or enabling destructive patterns. Perhaps the most valuable lesson was learning that financial independence provides not just security, but freedom. The freedom to make choices based on what is right for you, not what others expect. The freedom to help others genuinely, not out of obligation or fear. The freedom to set boundaries and have them respected. Today, I look at my duplex not just as a good investment, but as the catalyst for positive change in my life and ultimately in my family's dynamics. By standing firm in my decision, I found a strength and clarity I never knew I possessed. What boundaries have you had to set with family members over financial matters? Have you ever had to choose between your own well-being and family expectations? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both yourself and others is to set clear, firm boundaries with love.